In the bustling city of Lagos lived a 25-year-old woman named Agnes. She was the daughter of a late billionaire known for his sprawling wealth and influence. Agnes was her father's only child, and his passing left her with a legacy both remarkable and conditional. At the reading of her father's will, the family gathered in a grand room filled with tension and curiosity. The family lawyer, dressed impeccably in a dark suit, held the document that would determine the future of the billionaire's fortune. Clearing his throat, the lawyer began, "This is the last will and testament of Chief Obafemi Williams." His voice echoed through the room, commanding attention. The family listened intently as he continued. Chief Williams has allocated 30% of his wealth and properties to be shared among his extended family. However, the remaining 70%, along with ownership of his company, is bequeathed to his beloved daughter, Agnes Williams. Agnes felt her heart leap, but her joy was short-lived as the lawyer paused before delivering the crucial condition. "There is, however, a stipulation," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Agnes Williams can only claim her inheritance, including her father's properties, money, and position as CEO of the company, on one condition. She must first be married." The room fell silent. The weight of the condition settled on Agnes like a heavy cloud. Her father's words, spoken through the lawyer, were unmistakable. "This is not just a matter of wealth," the lawyer emphasized, reading further. "It is a matter of responsibility and stability. I trust my daughter to make the right decision for her future." Agnes felt a mix of emotions: shock, confusion, and a hint of defiance. Her father had always been a man of principles, and this condition, though surprising, reflected his belief in the importance of family and partnership. As the lawyer folded the will, all eyes turned to Agnes. She now faced an unexpected journey, finding a partner not for love alone, but to secure her legacy. In the vibrant chaos of Lagos, where opportunities and challenges often intertwine, Agnes realized her father had left her more than wealth. He had left her a test of character, trust, and the ability to navigate life's complexities. But how? Her thoughts drifted back to her university days, to James, the boy who had once captured her heart. They had dreamed of a future together, but after graduation he had vanished without a trace. For years she had wondered what had happened to him, but now she had to move on. James was a part of her past, and she had to focus on her future. "I'll do it," Agnes said finally, her voice resolute. "If marrying someone is what it takes to protect my father's legacy, then I'll find a way." The lawyer nodded. "Very well, Agnes. I wish you luck." As the lawyer left, Agnes stood by the window, staring out at the sprawling estate that her father had loved so much. She had always thought she'd have more time to figure out her life. Now, time was a luxury she couldn't afford. The clock was ticking, and her journey had just begun. Agnes decided to visit her father's company to observe its operations. Walking through the office doors, she was greeted warmly by Paul, a charismatic and attentive employee. His charm and dedication quickly caught her attention. Paul introduced himself as the head of operations and offered to show her around. His pleasant demeanor left Agnes feeling hopeful. As days turned into weeks, Paul and Agnes grew closer. Paul's kindness and understanding seemed to align perfectly with her current predicament. It wasn't long before their relationship blossomed into something deeper. When Paul proposed, Agnes saw him as the solution to her inheritance dilemma, and readily accepted. Wedding plans began in earnest, but an unease lingered in the back of Agnes's mind. Was Paul truly the man he appeared to be? Or was there more beneath his charming exterior? As the wedding date approached, Agnes found herself caught up in a whirlwind of preparations. One afternoon, she decided to visit a local mall to buy some fresh fruits. The bustling environment provided her a brief escape from the pressures of planning her wedding. While walking past a street corner near the mall, she froze. There, sitting on the pavement, was a man she recognized immediately. James. her college sweetheart. His once confident demeanour was now replaced by a dishevelled appearance, and he was begging for money. Agnes's heart sank. "James," she whispered in disbelief, rushing over to him. James looked up, his face lighting up with recognition. "Agnes, long time no see, how are you?" he said, his voice filled with a mix of joy and embarrassment. "What happened to you?" Agnes asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you begging for money here?" James sighed, explaining that life had been harsh after graduation. Unable to find a stable job, he had resorted to begging to survive. Agnes, overwhelmed with emotions, assured him that she would help. They exchanged numbers before she left, promising to stay in touch. That evening, as Agnes recounted her encounter with James to Paul, his reaction was far from supportive. Paul's face darkened with anger. "Why are you telling me this?" he snapped. Agnes, startled by his tone, tried to calm him. "Please, Paul, I just want to help him. Can we give him a job, maybe as a driver? He needs a second chance." After a heated argument, Paul reluctantly agreed, though his discontent was evident. The next day, Agnes called James to share the news. "James, I found you a job. You can work as a driver for us," she said warmly. James, grateful and excited, accepted without hesitation. His first day at work was a mix of nerves and determination. As Paul's driver, James got a closer look at the man Agnes was planning to marry. Paul's behaviour toward James was cold and dismissive, but James brushed it off, focusing on his work. However, one evening, James noticed Paul lingering in his office long after work hours. Concerned that something might be wrong, James decided to check. What he saw left him stunned. Paul was in his office, locked in a passionate embrace with the company secretary. Their conversation revealed even more damning details. They were plotting to defraud Agnes after the wedding and seize her father's empire. James's heart pounded as he quietly closed the door. He knew he had to act fast. Night. James drove straight to Agnes's house, his mind racing with what he had seen. As soon as Agnes opened the door, he wasted no time. "Paul and the secretary are planning to deceive you," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. Agnes frowned, struggling to process his words. "James, are you sure about this? Paul has been nothing but kind to me," she replied, her voice tinged with doubt. James leaned forward, his tone firm. "I saw it with my own eyes, Agnes. They were in the office, kissing and talking about how they would take everything from you after the wedding. You need to be careful." Agnes looked away, her thoughts in turmoil. She wanted to believe James, but Paul had always seemed so genuine. "This is a lot to take in, James. I don't know what to think," she admitted softly. Later that evening, when Paul returned home, Agnes decided to confront him. "Paul, James said something disturbing about you," she began hesitantly. "He claims you and the secretary are plotting against me." Paul's expression darkened, but he quickly composed himself. "James is lying," he said, his voice sharp. "He barged into a private meeting and started causing trouble. He's trying to sabotage us, Agnes. You need to fire him." Agnes hesitated, her heart torn. James's sincerity had shaken her, but Paul's anger made her question everything. Eventually, she sided with Paul, believing his version of events. "I'm sorry, James," she said the next day. "I think it's best if you leave." Heartbroken but determined, James didn't argue. As he walked away, he vowed to uncover the truth and protect Agnes, no matter what it took. His resolve was stronger than ever. After James was fired, he spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to expose Paul's true intentions. Despite Agnes's disbelief, he was determined to protect her. He knew time was running out, with the wedding just days away. Agnes, on the other hand, tried to focus on her upcoming wedding. Deep down, Paul's reaction to the incident left her uneasy, yet she brushed aside her doubts, convincing herself that James's claims were baseless and driven by jealousy. Meanwhile, James decided to keep an eye on Paul. Disguised as a street vendor, he loitered near the company, watching Paul's movements. It wasn't long before he caught Paul meeting the secretary at a cafe. He carefully recorded their conversation with his phone, gathering evidence to back his claims. The recording revealed Paul bragging about his plan to marry Agnes, transfer her father's properties to himself, and then abandon her. The secretary laughed, saying, "And to think she believes you love her." James clenched his fists, his resolve stronger than ever. He needed to share this proof with Agnes before it was too late. The next day, James called Agnes. "Please, Agnes, I know you don't trust me, but I have proof. Meet me before your wedding, just for a few minutes," he pleaded. Agnes hesitated. Her loyalty to Paul wavered as James's desperation tugged at her heart. Reluctantly, she agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. When they met, James showed her the recording. Agnes listened intently, her heart sinking with every word. Tears welled in her eyes as Paul's betrayal became undeniable. "I didn't want to believe you," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But this changes everything," James reassured her. "You still have time, Agnes. Don't let him ruin your life." Agnes left the cafe after her meeting with James, feeling like her world was spinning. The recording James had shown her was damning, but part of her still clung to the belief that Paul wasn't capable of such deceit. After all, he had been nothing but loving and attentive since they met. As she sat in her car, Agnes's mind raced. Could James be lying? Was the recording fabricated? Or was Paul truly the fraud James claimed him to be? When she arrived home, Paul was already there, sitting in the living room and going through some wedding plans. He greeted her with his usual warm smile, but Agnes couldn't help feeling a pang of doubt as she looked at him. "You're quiet today," Paul observed, tilting his head. "Everything okay?" Agnes forced a smile and nodded. "Just tired from running errands." As they talked about the final preparations for their wedding, Agnes tried to gauge his reactions. She casually brought up topics about honesty and trust in relationships. "Paul, what do you think makes a relationship strong?" she asked. Paul paused, looking slightly puzzled by her sudden question. "Trust, of course. Without trust, nothing works," he replied confidently. His words sounded sincere, but Agnes couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her chest. Later that night, as Paul slept, she replayed the recording James had shown her. Paul's voice was unmistakable, and his words about defrauding her were crystal clear. Tears streamed down her face as doubt turned into painful realization. The next morning, Agnes called James. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I need to see you. You were right about Paul, and I need your help." When they met later that day, James was surprised by her change of heart. "What made you believe me?" he asked. Agnes sighed. "I didn't want to, but the truth was staring me in the face. I just needed time to process it." Together, they began planning their next move. Agnes knew she couldn't confront Paul directly without solid proof. James promised to help her gather more evidence, and Agnes resolved to investigate Paul's actions within her father's company. As she left James's apartment, Agnes felt a mix of relief and determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her father's legacy and the life she deserved. The big day had finally arrived, and the venue where Paul expected his wedding to unfold was buzzing with guests. Friends, family, and colleagues chatted happily, oblivious to the chaos brewing behind the scenes. Paul, seated in a luxurious hotel suite, adjusted his cufflinks with a smirk of confidence. Everything was going according to his plan. Soon, he would be married to Agnes and in control of her father's empire. Meanwhile, at another location miles away, a very different scene was playing out. Agnes, radiant in a white gown, stood at the altar beside James, her true love. The air was filled with warmth and joy as close friends and allies gathered to witness the union. Unlike the grand spectacle planned at Paul's venue, this ceremony was intimate and sincere, reflecting the authenticity of their love. As Agnes looked into James's eyes, she felt a wave of gratitude. This moment wasn't just about love. It was about reclaiming her life and making a stand against deceit. James, ever the supportive partner, gave her a reassuring smile. The officiant's voice carried through the hall as they exchanged vows, each word cementing their commitment to one another. Back at the hotel, Paul's phone buzzed. Initially brushing it off, he glanced at the screen and froze. The message was brief, but devastating. Agnes is getting married to someone else. His smug confidence shattered instantly. Impossible, he muttered, grabbing his jacket. His mind raced as he dialed his secretary. Find out where this wedding is happening, now. Minutes later, Paul was in his car, speeding toward the venue. Rage and disbelief clouded his judgment. How could Agnes have betrayed him? How could she dare humiliate him like this? When Paul finally arrived, the sight before him left him paralyzed. Agnes, dressed as a bride, stood hand in hand with James. Laughter and applause filled the air as the couple exchanged a kiss, sealing their vows. Paul stumbled forward, his voice trembling with anger. "What is going on here, Agnes? How dare you?" Agnes turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. "Paul, your lies and betrayal end here. This is my real wedding, and James is my real groom. Your schemes have no place in my life anymore." Paul's world crumbled as he realized he had lost everything. Paul burst into the wedding hall, his face red with anger and disbelief. The joyful hum of celebration abruptly stopped, replaced by a tense silence as all eyes turned toward him. "What is going on here?" Paul shouted, his voice echoing through the grand hall. His gaze darted between Agnes, resplendent in her bridal gown, and James, standing confidently by her side. Agnes stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. "Paul," she began, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This is the truth. You never loved me. You only wanted my father's properties, and you thought you could manipulate me into giving them to you." Paul's mouth opened to protest, but James raised a hand, stepping closer. His voice was steady but firm, carrying a weight that silenced Paul instantly. "I pretended to be a beggar to uncover your plans, Paul. I am not a beggar. I never was. After our education, I got a job overseas which took me away from Agnes, but I never abandoned her. When I returned, I saw you and your secretary together at a cafe, kissing and discussing your schemes. I was shocked when I later found out you were with Agnes, planning to marry her. I couldn't stand by and let someone like you, a thief, ruin her life." James paused, his voice gaining intensity. "I don't need Agnes's money to survive, Paul. I am successful in my own right. Unlike you, my intentions are pure. You and your secretary can scheme elsewhere, but Agnes is no longer your pawn." Paul's face turned pale as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged shocked glances, whispers of betrayal filling the room. Agnes reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "And just so everyone is clear," she said, her voice unwavering, "here is the evidence." She played a recording of Paul and the secretary plotting to defraud her. Gasps of disbelief erupted as the truth was laid bare. Defeated and humiliated, Paul lowered his head. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the venue, his plans in shambles and his reputation in tatters. Agnes turned back to James, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. The crowd erupted into cheers, celebrating not just their union, but the victory of truth and love over deceit. It was truly a day to remember. As the wedding ceremony continued, Agnes and James stood at the altar, their hands clasped tightly together. The room was filled with warmth and joy as their closest friends and family looked on. "Do you, James, take Agnes to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked. James smiled, his voice steady and heartfelt. "I do. I promise to stand by you, protect you, and love you for all the days of my life." The officiant turned to Agnes. Do you, Agnes, take James to be your lawfully wedded husband? Tears glistened in Agnes's eyes as she responded, I do. I promise to cherish you, trust you, and face every challenge together as one. Their vows echoed the depth of their journey, a story not just of exposing deceit, but of rediscovering a love that had withstood time and separation. As they exchanged rings, the crowd erupted into applause, celebrating a union built on trust, love, and resilience. James leaned in, whispering, We've been through so much, but this moment makes it all worth it. Agnes smiled, her heart full. It's the start of our forever. Their love was a testament to the strength of true connection, a bond unbroken by betrayal or circumstance. A few years later, Agnes and James welcomed their first child into the world, a beautiful baby girl. The joy of motherhood was overwhelming, and Agnes finally felt that everything she had worked for, fought for, was coming full circle. As they stood together, holding their child, Agnes realized that she had found what truly mattered. The company, the wealth, none of it compared to the love and happiness she had with James and their growing family. I'm so glad we're together, Agnes whispered as James kissed her forehead. This is my real happily ever after. And so Agnes and James began their life as a family, raising their children with love, respect, and the unwavering bond they had fought so hard to rebuild. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and drop your comment.